And we'll do the same thing now as we did after the first speaker. If anybody has a question right now, you'll be able to come back to it too, but anybody have an immediate question from us? Yes.
Yeah, what year was the California Flower Markets established?
I think about 1916 or something like that. It was in downtown where the old telephone building is now. It was an alleyway. And that's how it started out. And then we moved to 5th Street, where the Examiner building is, right across the street. And that was a rental property. There was two markets there. There was a Japanese market and a Chinese market, because they were growing chrysanthemums, carnations, and stuff like that.
Okay, during this part of the program, just very briefly, we're going to have a little interchange here among the panelists here. I'd like to start out by asking a question of Mas. With your experience at Euclid House and University of California, Berkeley, and you were there shortly after the war in 1948, I guess it was, when you graduated or started going there. Could you talk a little bit about what you heard the other Nisei at Euclid House, what they were saying about the Fair Play Committee?
They didn't say anything about the Fair Play Committee because I don't think they knew about these things, okay? But to me, I don't want to criticize the Nisei, because don't. But let me tell you, you know, they said they're not integrating with the white community. And so I told them, you gotta go out and go talk to this guy. You gotta go make friends with them. You can't be waiting for them to come to you. Because I had a lot of friends that are Caucasians, you know. But the Japanese were very, very ultra-conservative. So this is what I saw in my eyes. And because I came from Hawaii, I don't care who it is. Hey, I'm going to talk to the guy.
So Mas, while you were at UC Berkeley, did you hear anybody talk about the Fair Play Committee?
No, none at all. And let me give you another thing that happened to me. There was a shock. I was in Chicago, and my brother was in photo too, in Harrisburg, Mississippi. So I went down to see him. So I got on the train, left Chicago to go to Harrisburg, Mississippi. We stopped in Memphis, Tennessee. Got off the train. I went to the bathroom. And holy moly, I see colored and white bathrooms. Never in my dreams that I knew this kind of thing was happening in the United States. It was really a shock to me. So, you know, even the black people were treated like that. Not only the Japanese.
So which one did you use?
Exactly what I
Either one.
Okay, I'm going to ask one last question, then I'm going to open it up for the audience, but this is a question for Charles Wollenberg. So could you talk a little bit about what you see as the long-term impact of the Fair Play Committee?
It's hard to know exactly, because it's hard to know how much influence it had on that kind of that evolution of federal policy that I talked about. I think it had some impact. I think the fact that federal officials knew that at least there were some people in California, people of some influence, who were not haters, not racists, at least not supporting the policies of incarceration. I think that did give space for people like Secretary of the Interior Hickes or Attorney General Biddle within the Washington environment, within the Roosevelt administration, to make the case that, to have an opposing case. But, I can't, it's very hard to actually show specific cause and effect relationship. But the fact, I think, particularly that Ruth Kingman was able to make those kind of direct connections with very high officials, even with people in the White House, did make a difference. But, given today when we have things like the Patriot Act and indefinite detention and stuff like that, you kind of figure, where's the Fair Play Committee when we really need it? But so I think, but I can't prove those connections.
Thank you very much. Okay, at this point, I'd like to open this up to the audience. You can either ask questions, provide answers, provide reflections, or anything you would like to discuss at this point. So I'll open it up. Any comments or questions?
How did the Fair Play Committee interact with people in the camps in terms of their decision making? Did they communicate with organizations or churches in order to decide what they were going to do and advocate for?
I think to some degree, the Fair Play Committee defined itself as an advocacy group. So they said, we're not going to provide service to the people in the camps. We're going to try to change the government policy. So it wasn't a traditional civil rights group, that was providing protection, legal protection and that sort of thing. On the other hand, particularly Ruth Kingman, it was that she traveled to the camps. She traveled to Mississippi to see the 442nd. And she had a lot of contacts, particularly with people like the Japanese American Citizens League, with, I guess you could say, well-educated, assimilated, Nisei, the kind of people who she would have interacted with before the war at Stiles Hall. I think she and the committee had a lot less contact with people from rural areas, people of different classes. And that may have also reflected then her response to the quote-unquote troublemakers in the camps. She and the committee, I think, had the most contact with people from the JACL who were working with Dylan Myers and trying to cooperate in the camps. They had a lot less connections with those who were the rebels. But I think in fairness to the committee, even though they personally, I think, were repelled by some of the demonstrations and conflict in the camps, they always, as a matter of principle, say we're standing for the civil rights and civil liberties of everybody in the camps, even for those people, eventually not the committee itself, but people associated with the committee, got involved after the war in trying to reestablish the citizenship rights of people at Duluth Lake. So I think, I guess I'm getting away from your original quote. I think the contact they had, particularly during the war, tended to be from people like JACL, people who were the similar kinds of well-educated, assimilated Japanese Americans who they had known before the war at Cal, places like that.
Other questions or comments?
Well, I have two comments and a question. My first comment is to you, Rita. That is to say, I think this particular presentation is so powerful because you've juxtaposed a scholar with an eyewitness, somebody who's been in the history, and now particularly with everything online, that this kind of dialogue is even more important.
Well, thank
so
you.
thank you for having it.
It's great, yes.
Yeah, and Mr. Hongo, I don't know what to say, but thank you very much for everything. I just learned so much from you. I come from Asian American Studies, San Francisco State, and even though we did a lot of work, related to the internment, what you said today just hit me very hard. So thank you so much for that, because we need it now. And then for Mr. Wollenberg, my question about the Fair Play Committee is whether or not there were any non-white people involved in the committee.
They were all white. They were all, not all, I'd say all. There may have been members in some places, but the people who were active, the people in the Berkeley office, they were all white. They were all of middle or upper middle class or even upper class background. Again, this idea that this was a kind of an elite group. And I think they thought of themselves in that way. Again, it was a top-down group. There wasn't a lot of, the members didn't decide policy. Ruth Kingman and the executive committee, and Ruth Kingman sometimes by herself decided policy. So it was an elite group of white, middle and upper middle class, well-educated people. And I guess that, it works both ways. They had a lot of class prejudices and racial prejudices. On the other hand, they knew how to interact with the power structure. She knew how to go back to Washington, D.C. and sit down with cabinet members and sit down with the president's daughter and that sort of thing. So,
But there is an evolution, because when 9/11 happens, anybody who's Muslim or Arab gets targeted.
exactly.
It's the Japanese American community who comes up and says.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Where's the fair play committee when we need it now? In a sense, you need that bottom up. You need people from the bottom protesting, but it's always good to have some people at the top who have that access to the power structure.
That's what happened to the civil rights movement.
Yes, you have it from both sides. So, these people, this wasn't the Lone Ranger, this wasn't, the Great White Hope. There were a lot of things you can criticize the Fair Play Committee for, I think. They made compromises. They dissociated themselves from some of the most active fighters for civil liberties, both in, say, the Northern California branch of the ACLU or the protesters up at Tule Lake. And so, but on the other hand, they did remain, I think, consistent with their ideals, and I think they did have an impact.
Other comments, questions?
Yeah, I can't understand if the National ACLU and the Communist Party were such champions of human rights, why did they come out against, for incarceration, whereas the Fair Play Committee,
Yeah. Well, part of it has to do with racism. Part of it has to do with the war. There just was a war, and war, one of the first things one of the first casualties of war is truth, as far as the Communist Party, by that time the Communist Party was in this thing, we've got to fight for the survival of the Soviet Union, and that means rallying around the flag. This was part of the Common Front.
supporting Roosevelt.
They're supporting Roosevelt. And I think that also applies to the ACLU. Roosevelt was one of us. He was a liberal, and so we'll give him a pass on this. But I think there was also this great fear that if you were a radical, you didn't want to be considered anti-war. One of the things that Ruth Kingman in her oral history said, we had a few pacifists who were on the Fair Play Committee, and we really kept them away from the press and everything. We didn't want to be associated with being against the war effort. And so I think a lot of that is playing into this. So yeah, you have what would seem to be progressive groups that are supposed to be committed to civil liberties and civil rights, caving in on this. And I think that it's a great credit to this Northern California branch of the ACLU that it fought the national, that it was a defiance of the national. When Ernest Bessick went up to Tule Lake to investigate the conditions up there, the director of Tule Lake said, "I want to throw this guy off out of the camp," you know. And so Dylan Myers checked back with the office in New York, "Is it okay to throw Bessick out of the camp?" I said, "Yeah, throw him out." You know, in other words, you know, the San Francisco chapter was really in defiance of the national chapter in standing up for some of these things. So I think that gives you a sense, and again, for somebody like Robert Gordon Sproul, with the prestige he had and the amount of political clout he could be threatened with, in a sense, for him to stand up for this, it is impressive, I think, that people of the stature would do it when so many other people who you would have expected to stand up didn't.
I saw another hand behind somewhere here.
Given the backgrounds of some of the people you mentioned who were active on the Fair Play Committee, who I guess individually were stepping forward to join them, and I'm thinking especially of the class background, that it's quite possible, it seems to me ironically, that some of them or many of them would be also members of the Native Sons of the Golden West.
I don't know. Some of them may have been. I don't have that. One of the leader of the Pasadena chapter, I said the only local chapter that actually really existed, it was this Pasadena chapter. She was actually brought before a legislative committee because this legislative committee of the state legislature was saying these people are traitors, you know, they're supporting the Japanese Americans. And so the committee chairman asked her, you know, "Are you a member of the Communist Party?" And she said, "No, actually, I'm a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution, and I'm a Republican." So, you know, I don't know whether there were any members of Native Sons and Daughters of the American, but there were these people of upper class background and out of principle, I guess, because certainly you can't explain this on a purely class basis. There are a set of principles that these people will really stand by.
Okay. Yes.
I was a dissident at Tule Lake, and when I came out, or when they released me, I had to renounce my citizenship. And yet I wanted to continue my education, and I applied at UCLA. And because of the policy by President Gordon Sproul, I was accepted as a resident of California, very feel obligated to Gordon Sproul and also to the Fair Play Committee. Yes, I just wanted to bring that up.
In 1942, the university scholar, every year at graduation, Robert Gordon, at the ceremony in Berkeley, when it came time to make this award, he said, "Our award winner has been called by the government and is not able to be here." And then Robert Gordon Sproul went up to Sacramento a few days later and gave the award at the camp. And he was roundly criticized by the McClatchy newspapers, for example, in Sacramento. So, you know, you got to give him credit. I mean, he had a lot to lose, not nearly as much to lose as the people in the camps, but he was a guy of influence and importance, and he kind of put his reputation on the line for what he believed in.
Okay. Other comments, questions? Yep. Okay.
Well, I just want to thank the panel because actually everything I've learned today clears up a lot of kind of what I thought were inconsistencies or kind of mysteries in our family history. For example, I never knew exactly why my grandfather was, after a while, was allowed to leave camp and find work in a local town. You know, I didn't understand why he was able to leave the camps in late 1944, when history tells us that the camps were closed in 45, but you know, he's identifiably a Japanese American. But he's allowed back into California because he went back to see the property and see how it was, and it was bad. But I, you know, it kind of clears up a lot because a lot of it's left out because of just limited space, limited time, and just actually I think limited knowledge of people who are actually live through it, and people who actually will tell you about these things. Especially in my own family, there's a lot of sense of shame about it, so it doesn't get talked about. And so it's just people like me didn't live through it, and we ask all these questions and kind of, I would say badger, well, I will say badger our parents until they finally kind of spill. And so I feel that, you know, it's not a happy time in American history. But it needs to be expressed so that young people like me, or even younger, will understand. And you know, say, well, why are my parents like this? Why does my mother react this way? You know, and also just on a kind of darkly humorous way, for Mr. Hongo, my great uncles who were actually also in the Army. They had a similar experience in Deep South when we went for basic training. And they had gotten off the train, they were thirsty, and they're confronted with two water fountains. One says whites only, one says colors only. So being, considerate, they head for the wrong one, which was the colored. And so they start drinking, and a crowd starts gathering around them. And one loudmouth says, "Oh, what do you boys think you're doing?" And they say, "Well, we're not white." He said, "Well," and the guy said, "Well, you're not." And he stopped from saying the word. He says, "Let me tell you boys something. You want to avoid trouble, you use the whites only." And that was that. But that was a prevailing attitude. It's like, where do you fit? And it's something that a lot of us do struggle with even today. So anyway, this brought up a lot of memories, so I want to thank you for kind of filling in the gaps. Really.
Just two things. I think that a lot of people who even from families who went through this don't realize that the government policy changed as early as December of 1944, 7 or 8, 9 months before the end of the war. But the other thing, of all the many crazy decisions that would be made at that time, the idea that the 442nd was training in Mississippi, why would you send these Japanese American kids down to Mississippi?
Thank you for your comments. Anybody else? Yes.
I have one question for Mr. Wollenberg and one for Ms. Hongo. Mr. Wollenberg, I understood that Eleanor Roosevelt was quite sympathetic, and I have a comment on that. And Mr. Hongo, what's the status of the flower market now?
Well, it's bought by Kilroy, and still it's up in the air. There is no communication. Sorry, but I don't know. The president and management are not forthcoming. And I think they should be forthcoming, and they should lay everything on the table. And as things go on and there are changes, there should be communication to the public and to the stockholders, but none of that is happening.
Do you have something about the flower market?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I guess just Wednesday, I went to the farmer market, and I saw a couple people trying to get petitions to keep the flower market open. So there's some troubles there. I didn't sign it, but I didn't know what was going on. But I just wanted to add that to it because that was just a few days ago. Yeah. So clearly
That petition is primarily to put a ballot on the city ballot. So that would encumber the property.
Thank you.
The question about Eleanor Roosevelt, at the beginning of the war, and after the president issued Executive Order 9066, she at least publicly supported her husband, supported the administration, supported the camps. As the war went on, she had a daily news column, and she almost was operating as a kind of independent entity. And as the war went on, she began in her column to become more sympathetic. She visited a couple of the camps. I mentioned that Ruth Kingman arranged for some of Obata's paintings to be given to the Roosevelt family. I think they were specifically given to Eleanor, and that was, consciously, because she was a very important opinion maker. So as the war went on, she did become more sympathetic. I think probably her daughter affected that too. But at least at the beginning, she kind of towed the party line and supported the idea of the camps and supported her husband.
Any other comments, questions? Mas, I have, go ahead.
In your article in California History, you mentioned about Earl Warren going through a transformation. Can you elaborate on that?
Just, very, very briefly. He was, in 1953, he became Chief Justice of the United States. In 1954, he wrote the majority opinion in the Brown versus Board of Education system decision, which knocked the props out of the Jim Crow system, knocked the constitutional props. And then over the next 15 years, the Warren Court let down all of these landmark decisions that expanded the scope of civil rights and civil liberties. And yet during that whole time, Earl Warren continued publicly to defend his activities during World War II in support of the internment or of the incarceration. Just really briefly, there's a great story that one of his biographers tells, where Warren is having a dinner with his young law clerks, an informal dinner. They've had a few drinks, and one of the law clerks is a white guy from the South, and of course by that time the White South was trying to impeach Earl Warren. So he starts kidding this kid from the South, and the kid comes right back and says, "What was the name of that governor of California that advocated locking up all the people in jail?" And all of a sudden there was silence in the room. This 23-year-old kid is challenging the Chief Justice of the United States. But Warren laughed, and then he once again defended what he was doing. But I think there's clearly that he had private doubts. And I won't go through the process, but he retired in 1969 as Chief Justice. And in 1971, he was engaging in an oral history interview at the Bancroft Library at Cal. And when they got to the part of his career regarding the incarceration, they began talking about the impact of that on children, and he literally broke down. Tears started coming out of his eyes, and he couldn't go on with the interview. They had to wait about 10 or 15 minutes for him to recover. And by that time, some of his family and friends were saying he should make a public apology. But he resisted that until he wrote his memoirs at the very end of his life. And they weren't published until after he died. But in his memoirs, I don't know, if you want to just read one more part. I was going to talk too long, so I never got to this. But in his memoirs, he did say, this is about as far as he ever went, "I have since deeply regretted that removal order in my own testimony advocating it, because it was not in the keeping with our American concept of freedom and the rights of citizens." So I think you could say that 36 years later, Earl Warren finally comes around to the position that the Fair Play Committee had established back in 1941. And I guess you could say it's good that he did that, but it was a long, long, long time coming. And I guess, by that time, Congress had already passed a joint resolution apologizing for the incarceration. And then, just a decade later, in 1988, the reparations were approved by Congress. So Earl Warren does come around, but it takes a long time for him to do it publicly. And even then, as I say, it was published after his death. While he was alive, he never openly apologized or said anything.
What year did he pass?
I think it was 1975, 76. The memoir was published in 77. By that time he was dead, so it was 76 or 75. I can't remember the exact date.
In your article, you mentioned that he even went through a transformation. At the very start of the war, he was more sympathetic to the Japanese, and then it seemed that
Well, you know, one of the reasons he became the kind of de facto, what I define as the de facto leader, was because he had a reputation even before the war as a moderate, as a person who often fought against racism. When he was DA of Alameda County, the Ku Klux Klan was very active in Oakland and Alameda County. He fought against them. And so he had a reputation of being a liberal on race issues. So when he came out in favor of, and very strongly, and in racist terms, although he would not have admitted that, in favor of incarceration, it gave it credibility. It gave it credibility, you know, people like Walter Lippmann, who was a famous newspaper columnist at the time, said, well, if Earl Warren is for it, it must be the right thing to do. So there's a kind of irony that the reputation he had as being somebody who resisted racism gave him even greater credibility when he argued in favor of the incarceration.
Do you have any speculations as to why he came out so for it?
Well, I mean, part of it certainly has to do with the fact that people really were concerned about the war, just like people today are in favor of the Patriot Act because they're afraid of terrorism. But I think, you know, the governor at the time that Pearl Harbor occurred was a liberal Democrat, Colbert Olson, and Warren was the leading Republican in California at that time. He was very much against it. Olson came out in favor of the incarceration too. But Warren came out much more solidly, and a lot of the reason why he got elected governor in 1942 was because of his strong, you know, actions regarding the war. And I think his strong support of the policy was one of the things that gained him popularity and helped understand why he got elected governor. So I guess what I'm saying is there was a political motivation. It may not have been the only motivation. He probably really believed in what he was doing, but it was certainly good politics.
Moss, I have a question about back to UC Berkeley and being there right after all the Nisei came out of camps or were excluded and incarcerated. So what do you recall some of the comments that were being made at that time by the Nisei since they just came out?
You know, my idea completely opposed Niseis in California because they were ultra-conservative. They never went out to meet the other people, the white people. They expected them to come to them. So I told them, you have to go out. Talk to them. When you see them on the campus, talk to them. But never did that. They were that conservative. And of course, as I look back, I can see because they were always suppressed all their lives. So this mindset prevailed even when they were going to school. And that's my viewpoint.
Yes.
Well, when I was at UCLA, my friends were veterans, and I was, of course, out of Tulane. And the reason was that I wanted to avoid other Japanese Americans who had been in camp and who would ask me, what camp were you in? And so I didn't associate with Japanese, but I did have non-Japanese friends, and they were ironically veterans who didn't want to talk about the war experience, theirs or mine.
We're about out of time, but we'll take one more question or comment. If anybody has a burning question or comment. Okay, I guess we're about finished. Well, I want to thank, well, first of all, okay.
Incidentally, this publication of his article is a bit of a California Historical Society. It's available. And also, Mas Hongo's book is available from AACP. So you might want to consider that.
Right, that's one of the things that I also wanted to say, that MAS has been affiliated with the Asian American Curriculum Project in San Mateo, and that's been going since, when did it start, Florence? 1970. So that's great. And Charles was saying that that article is available online.
Through the California Historical Society.
Okay.
You could get the hard copy as well somewhere.
Okay. Well, I want to thank both of you for an absolutely outstanding program here. Really, really appreciate that, and I'm so glad that it's being recorded because you both very succinctly gave a presentation that was just packed with great information and something historically significant for all of us. So thank you so much.
Thank you.